Good day, everybody. Good day to all of you in Facebook land or Instagram land. Thank you for being here with us today. For those that don't know me, my name is James Weeks. I'm the author of the book Meditations Across the King's River. Um, I'm also the producer of the upcoming documentary film Across the King's River. I help people with strategies for emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, and financial wellness. For more information about me, visit acrossthekingsriver.com. Today, I'm excited to have a very special guest with us. I haven't done one of these Facebook Lives in a while, but we're doing one today. Very special, brilliant young sister from the beautiful island of St. John, Virgin Islands. So she's a Islander like me. And if you haven't visited the Virgin Islands, you must do so. So Dr. Hadiya Sewer is philosopher, business coach, activist, scholar. She has multiple degrees. Um, and today she's going to talk to us about building wealth while living passionate, fulfilling lives in a business. And so she's on a mission to help creative people, healers, conscious business people. Dr. Hadiya Sewer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Baba James, and also hello to everyone who's listening in. It's an absolute pleasure to join you this afternoon. I know, of course, I've been following your work for quite some time. I deeply enjoy reading Across the King's River, as well as an earlier blog of yours. I believe it was Under the Tamarind Tree,
Yes,
or
Tamarind Years. Tamarind Years.
how many years? And so it's wonderful to be able to be in conversation with you today.
Beautiful, beautiful. So could you tell, before we get into like the work you're doing now and your mission to empower people through, again, living, fulfilling lives and blending in that with their life purpose to create a sustainable income. Could you tell us a bit about your journey, where you started, how you got into this space and the services that you offer?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. In many ways, this feels like a full circle moment in my life, in the sense that I grew up in a multi generational, entrepreneurial Afro Caribbean family. And so, as a St. Johnian, I have roots across the Virgin Islands and St. John, US Virgin Islands, as well as St. Thomas, St. Croix, and the British Virgin Islands. And so, my parents had a few businesses in the transportation and the real estate industry. And so I, as a kid, spent, my mornings, my evenings, and my weekends working in almost every area of the family businesses. And so when I went to grad school, I did my PhD in Africana Studies. I focused a lot on questions of decolonization, racial justice, feminism, and I really believed that I was going to be in the social impact space, and really focus on empowerment as well as activism in my work. And it's actually through my journey with spirituality and with Ifa in particular, right, that I felt as though my ancestors were guiding me back to the question of financial security and abundance. And so I started building out my own consultancy as an art and social impact advisor. However, when I became really honest with myself and I listened closely to what I felt like my ancestors were saying to me, I realized that I've always been the friend who had business advice for people who wanted to grow their businesses. And so I enrolled in like a business coaching certificate program and doubled down on helping conscious entrepreneurs, creatives, and change makers, really figure out how they can make more money in developing and growing their businesses, and then also leverage those businesses and that wealth to live a really beautiful life, because I think that's what the purpose of wealth is in part.
That's beautiful, and I love how you talked about you coming from this multi-generational family of businesses. Hello, Shonda. Shonda's joining us. And that's so crucial because one of the things I've learned is that if somebody doesn't have somebody else in the family in business of any kind, then it's difficult for them to know like what to anticipate. But if you have someone else in your family who's in business, they could even help your mindset because they'll have an expectation of no, 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 don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But if there's nobody there to sound, as a sounding board, it becomes difficult for us to grow in isolation. So when would you say you had your like aha moment? You said that, you felt like your ancestors were leading you back to the business side. And honestly, on my own journey, I feel that way too about where I am on my own journey. So I want to hear from you, like when did you have that aha moment,
In some ways, I feel like it might have been a string of aha moments. I have always had a side business, so to speak. When I was in grad school, I think that the experience of many academics is that we often tend to, quote unquote, get very meager salaries or stipends as we undergo our graduate studies. And so many of my peers and I, right, found it incredibly difficult to live off of the stipend and salary that we were receiving during our PhD journey. And so it occurred to me that I had always had a bit of an entrepreneurial endeavor that I was working on in college. It was like a vintage online store, things like that to supplement my income, right? But the aha moment for me really happened around the COVID-19 pandemic, in part because it was such a tumultuous time for so many people, both individually and collectively. It was also the moment of the murder of George Floyd. And so a lot of conversations around racial justice and the desire for change were happening at that particular time. But what I recognized is that I was actually able to hire a handful of people in my life whom I loved and cared about really deeply, who had been laid off as a result of the pandemic. And when it occurred to me that wealth was not simply, right, about how I, Hadiya Sewer, could live well, but that wealth was really about how I could leverage resources in order to benefit members of my wider community, as well as my community as a whole, the light really came on for me, because I think a lot of my resistance to entrepreneurship was this idea that, capitalism, of course, is predatory and greedy, and that I did not want to construct companies that were extracting resources and exploiting people, right? But that moment forced me to reframe my relationship to enterprise and to actually consider that, oh, wow, this is also such an incredible vehicle, right, for doing good. And so having that opportunity to employ and to support other people, but also to give back in moments of crisis and disaster, and have long-term like philanthropic and social impact strategies embedded in my company as well as in my family businesses, that was a really big aha moment for me.
That's so powerful, and so to be honest, on my own journey, so I mean, for those who are familiar with my book, Meditations Across the King's River, African Inspired Wisdom for Life's Journey, I included a chapter on finance. And so one of the things that happened on my own journey is I started to realize, I started to look deep inside my own community. And I realized that, to be honest, like in other communities, I saw people who were actually thriving more or doing well financially. I became a student. Okay, what are other people doing? What are these other communities doing? Um, and I became a student of that, and I just started to see this imbalance, and I started to study behavior and thought patterns that keep us. We have a lot of thought patterns and behavior patterns that, to be honest, keep us broke and that keep us marginalized, and we have to shift that. Um, and I'll talk more about that. So could you tell us, right now, so what are the services that you provide, and how exactly do you help people right now in the program in what you do?
Right. And so at the moment, what I'm offering is a business coaching program. I primarily previously worked one on one, but I'm actually encouraging a lot of my clients as well as future clients to consider joining a group program that I'm launching soon, in part because the way that I structure the program, or what I would call the signature method, right, of how I guide clients through establishing a business and or growing a business, is really focusing on three key areas. And fundamentally, I believe that a good conscious business, right, is sacred, it's scalable, and it's also sustainable. And so initially, I really like to dig in and focus on the question of like, well, what are your values? And to really encourage people to think about what they understand their sacred purpose to be, as well as their vision and their mission for their life, but also for this business, right? And then to craft the brand's identity around what I like to call the big why and the juicy yeses, right? Their mission, their vision, their values, and their primary motivations. And then, of course, once you do that, we tend to find that there are still areas where we need to develop our consciousness. And so often that's the mindset work that you spoke about earlier, in order to allow ourselves to be a little bit more capable of receiving the abundance that we are working towards. But also sometimes it's about learning about the social issues that we're hoping to impact, or even learning just more about business itself, right? And what it is that we are growing. And then after that, the process of creating a scalable business becomes our next primary focus. So, like, how do you create an offer, a product and a service that's not going to have you stressed out, busy, overwhelmed, exhausted, and then starting to like resent your business, right? But actually thinking about how do you establish your offer, price it appropriately, and then think about what your return on investment is going to look like, and how you can maximize that return on investment by creating mindfulness rituals for yourself to support your well-being, and then also creating like systems, right, and teams in the company in order to scale your growth. And then finally, we think about sustainability, because I find that you want to also be in sacred community. You want to hone your influence. You want to design what I call conscious impact metrics, which is thinking about the company's social and corporate responsibility. How does it impact the environment? How does it impact the people who work for the business, your clients, as well as the wider communities, right? And really doubling down on this notion of seeing the company as a vessel for sacred service. And so I really adore working with entrepreneurs who are sometimes at the beginning stage, as well as those who have already made a significant amount of money, but it left them feeling unbalanced and overwhelmed, right? As well as disconnected from their purpose.
I love that. It sounds powerful. I mean, you touch on so many key areas, and I love the part which you said about having mindful rituals to sustain oneself. But all of the things that you talked about, having an offer, how to serve without getting burnt out, because that's what happens to a lot of people. They, some people get burned out, and like you said, they may start to resent the sacred thing that they've been called to do for a lot of reasons. It's all powerful. So can I ask, so how can people get in contact with you if they want to learn more about your service?
Yes, thank you for asking that. I can be found on my website at hadiyasewer.com. And then I can also be found on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook under my own name. And for people who are interested in my services and are curious about when the group program is opening, or just how they could schedule a one-on-one session, I always also recommend that they sign up for my newsletter, because you'll get updates. And then also I like to drop some goodies every now and then. So, if you want to get worksheets on how to find like your ideal client, or how to develop your brand, how to calculate your ideal target monthly income, I often drop tips on my blog and also in my newsletter.
I love that. And just so I have two questions I want to ask you. Um, so, um, so for those who are listening, if I were to ask you, how would someone know, like, if you are right for them? Like, if you were to say, like, if there was a profile of people who you feel are right for you, right, and your service, who is that person, or
Yeah,
who is that woman? How would you define that?
I love this because I really do believe that often when we think about branding, it's good to know who we consider to be our people, right? Who are our ideal clients, who are the people we love to work with and desire to call in. And so I would say my people are creatives, change makers, as well as people who understand themselves to be in conscious businesses, whether they're healers, whether they're spiritual practitioners, or people who lead businesses that have fundamentally feminist, i.e., pro Black liberation, etc., values at the core of their identity as well as at the core of their company. I find that really and truly, change makers and creatives, I think we're a very beautiful and special bunch, in part because we have so much desire and passion, right, to change the world. But it also creates like a set of traps that can lead to exhaustion or a feeling of martyrdom, or thinking that your commitment to community has to be self sacrificial. And so I say that these are my people in part because I like to suggest that we can transform our communities while also transforming our own personal lives and fostering well being, for ourselves, but also for the wider collective.
Beautiful. And so, I love so much about what you said. So this idea of having an ideal client. Um, for those who don't know what an ideal client is, could you talk about that? So the reason why this is so important, I'm just going to say this broadly, and then you could go into this. Is oftentimes when people go into business of any kind, it doesn't matter what business it is, right? A lot of people think, if you ask them, well, who's your customer? They'll say, well, everyone could benefit from whatever it is they offer, whether it's um, holistic medicine, whether it's they're in the plumbing business, they have it in their heads. It's everybody. But that's not really true. That's not effective because you can't speak to everybody effectively. So, could you talk about this notion of the ideal client, what it means to you, and why it's so important?
Yeah, it's so important, for multiple reasons, right? In terms of, I like to call it good energy stewardship, like being a good steward of our own energy. I think it's best to work with people, when we enjoy working with the majority of our clients. And so being very clear about who you enjoy working with is something that I think is very important. But then the other practical reason is that when you're marketing, you can't necessarily speak to everybody at once, right? There's a bit of an idiom in marketing spaces that if you're talking to everybody, then you're talking to nobody, right? Because if you give generic articulations of what you do in hope of casting a wide net, then often the people who are listening aren't really sure that you're speaking to them. And so when you really niche down on your ideal client, you're able to speak more precisely and it really resonates with people better because it's not just an overarching person or generalized person that you're speaking to. They hear you speaking to them. And so I encourage clients to create an ideal client avatar, which is really just sitting down and almost even fantasizing, right? About the personality, the age, the lifestyle, etc., of your ideal client. Because when you start writing your marketing, it becomes a lot sharper, a lot clearer. Your ideal people really hear you. And if you want to hear like an example of what that sounds like, I'd also be happy to say a little bit more.
Hmm. So I want to ask you this other question. So, what would you say, looking at where you are now on your journey, um, if you could go back to yourself like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, what would you? What does the Dr. Hadiya Sewer know now that you wish you had known or paid attention to 5 or 10 years ago? If there were like one or two things, what would those one or two things be? Like the wiser you in your moment, as you look back, you said like, I wish I had done this. or I wish I paid more attention to this, what would that be?
The first thing that I would say is that I wish I had built a comfortability with wealth earlier on. I think that sometimes we can get really caught in narratives that wealth as a whole, right, is terrible, it's bad, only people who are evil and greedy make a ton of money. And then, when you're growing up, sometimes you're like, I don't want to be like the evil and greedy people. And so you might make decisions that undermine your capacity to build wealth, right? And so I wish that if I could speak to a younger version of myself, I would say, one, to actually just be a little bit more comfortable about having the resources to have your own stability to some extent, but also to be able to leverage those resources for social transformation and for the well-being of others as well. And then the other lesson I would give myself is that simplicity is king. And I know that there's also another business coach who says that simplicity scales, right? And that would be like Rachel Rogers, who wrote the book We Should All Be Millionaires, quote unquote. But the reason that I would say simplicity is king is because as people who are multi-hyphenate and multi-passionate, we have so many interests. We have interests and talents and expertise in a wide variety of areas. And so sometimes we want to implement and execute every good idea. And I really sometimes encourage clients as well as myself, once I started, coaching myself and also being coached by other business coaches, to focus on growing and scaling a business and then pinch off the profits from that business to grow and scale another enterprise if you're interested, right, in growing and scaling a company, because it can be challenging to wear so many different hats, which kind of bleeds into the third lesson, that delegation is really important, right? We cannot do everything by ourselves. We get exhausted, we get tired, especially, I would say, as women who are often caretakers in the home, and then people who also have professional jobs and capacities, right? And so we have to be super, and younger Hadiya needed to be a little bit more strategic, right, about how I spent my time and how I delegated some of the tasks that were under the purview of my responsibility, so that I could focus on doing things that had large returns on investment.
Wow. Beautiful. And I love what you said about wealth, how so many of us, we have this narrative of it not being good, or we don't want to go down that road, or, we, we create this narrative like it's holy to be broke when it's not. It's stressful to be broke, right? Um, so I want to ask you this. So as you work with clients today, what, if I were to ask you, where do you feel people struggle with the most? Like as you look at, okay, all of the people you've worked with today, where would you say they are struggling the most?
I really love this question, in part because what I would say is that it's a bundle of about 2 to 3 issues, right? One essentially being that people really struggle with creating an offer, i.e., a product or a service in their business that is actually profitable, right? And profitability often encourages us to consider, well, what's the cost of labor, right? What are the other expenses that are required in order for me to deliver this product or service? But then also, are there actual profit margins, right, in the service or product that I'm offering? And I'll give a bit of an example. I find that if you have a client who, let's say, they price a 1 hour session at $25, and then they find that they're struggling to make ends meet at the end of the month, one of the things we can look at is, okay, how many sessions at $25 an hour, right, are you actually able to do uh, feasibly in a month? And then once people look at those numbers, they're then able to realize, oh, wow, that's not a sustainable price point for me, right? And so, how can I then think about pricing my offer in a way that pays myself fairly, that pays members of my team fairly, that allows me to deliver the product or service with some level of efficiency, but also integrity, and that is actually a good fit, right? Not only for my clients, but also for my lifestyle.
Uh, Beautiful. So I want to say that we're open to questions. So if you have some idea, business, something you're struggling with, or you want to just, you know, put it out here in the chat, we'll be happy to respond to it. Dr. Hadiya Sewer will respond to it, and I'll respond to it too. Um, so don't feel shy about whatever questions you have. So I just wanted to share from my own experience working with people also, some of the things that I've noticed in working with people. So what I'm about to say applies for anyone who maybe they have a business idea of some kind, or a gift of some kind, or a service of some kind, um, or anyone who's thinking of going into business in the future. So one of the key things that I find is that, people are reluctant to promote themselves. They're reluctant to say, this is what I do and this is what I have to offer, right? This is huge. It's like, it's like, to be honest, so many people struggle with this for a lot of different reasons. They say, well, maybe I'm not ready yet, or I need, you know, it's like a lack of conviction around that they have a legitimate service or gift to do. And so what happens is they end up never ever talking about it, never ever promoting themselves in any way. And so when you do that, what you're doing is you're asking people to guess that you have a service. So here it is, you're talking about, you're struggling like most people end up doing to just survive, right? And then you're asking people to guess, oh, this person is a massage therapist. Oh, this person is, a diviner. Oh, this person does Reiki. If you never, ever, ever promote what you do, you're asking people to guess, and if you're asking people to guess, well, people are not in the guessing game, right? They'll just go with someone else that they know and understand what their business and service is. And you'll miss out on your own growth. So that's a huge thing. People say, well, I don't, I can't, I'm introverted, I can't put myself out there, and so they never do. So that's issue number one. We have to like stop doing that, because they're undermining ourselves when you do that. Um, Also, I would say in our day and time, um, when we talk about letting people know what you service you do, is find a platform, you know, because no matter how you look at it, you have to promote yourself in some way. There's so many platforms where you don't have to know and use all platforms. There's LinkedIn. Someone could use LinkedIn to say, hey, this is who I am and what you could use Instagram, you could use Facebook. You don't have to use every single one. And if maybe you don't want to use any of those, maybe use a podcast. I mean, you just have to pick a platform that you will use and then be consistent with that platform, right? Um, and if you don't want to do that, then you have to partner with someone who's going to help you do that. But it's important. A lot of people have this idea like, oh, they're just going to go by word of mouth, right? But the issue with word of mouth is referrals, yes, are a part of business, but referrals can't get you to the next level. Apple Computer didn't get to where it is by referrals. Imagine if, you had to wait for someone to, no, these companies are actively promoting themselves. So that's another part of our growth as conscious people, is not being afraid to do that. Um, the second thing, the third thing is that, also, even though we're talking about, okay, how do we lead more satisfying lives and, you know, earn more money in the process, what I've realized too is that there has to be more than, even though I'm a big proponent of wealth, and I really think about, um, well, strategies like 24/7, to be honest, it's that we have to have something higher than just money to keep us committed. And so I'll tell you why this is so important, right? The reason why this is so important is because a lot of people end up chasing money. And what I mean by that, and this is why it's a disaster. I'll tell you why. And this is not to say we shouldn't be wealth conscious. We should be wealth conscious. What I mean by this is a lot of people are not willing to do anything for any long period of time. When I say long period of time, I mean like 2 to 5 years. I mean, so if you have an idea, my advice is be willing to do it for 3 to 5 to 6 years. I mean, give it some time. But what happens, a lot of people jump into, oh, I have this gift. They might do it for a month or two, and then it's not where they want to be, then they stop doing it. And then they go do something else, thinking, well, that didn't work, so I'm going to do this other thing. Then they do that some other thing for another 2 to 3 months, 4 months, and then they're not seeing the results. Then they go do something else. Well, that didn't work either, right? Let me go do this other thing. They do that for another 3 to 4 months, doesn't work out, and then they're on to something else. That's what I call chasing money. And that's a waste of time. And so it's just important to, stick with something and to think of service long term in terms of like, okay, who do I want to impact? What legacy do I want to leave? What am I best suited for? What are your thoughts, Dr. Sewer?
I really love what you're saying in terms of both points, right? And so I'll work backwards and respond to the most recent remark. And I think that you're absolutely right. I find that so much of wealth, right, is built through consistent and repetitive steps over time. And I say that in part because I was also recently reading The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And it's one of the things that he talks about in one of the essays in the book, that when we look at Bill Gates, we tend to think of his wealth as being this massive windfall. But in reality, a lot of his wealth was accumulated from consistent small steps that were taken over time. And so when we continue to hop from idea to idea to idea, as you're suggesting, we really miss out on the opportunity, right, to see the outcome of our action snowball into a larger quote unquote sum of satisfaction or quote unquote sum of money. And one of the things that I always encourage entrepreneurs to do is to create a checklist of tasks that they are going to do almost daily, right? For their personal well-being as well as for the growth of the quote unquote business. Because those steps taken over time have a massive impact. And I know while many people in the entrepreneurial space have read Tim Ferriss's, the 4-hour work week, I find that people get shocked when they hear me say, like, I really don't work more than like 5 to 10 hours a week in my business. I don't do it. Like, I just do not do it. In part because I have figured out how, right? I can leverage my resources, but also organize my schedule in a way that I am prioritizing the consistent tasks that have the larger quote unquote return on investment. And so, as you're saying, being able to know clearly what our purpose is and what our values are, right? It gives us that higher purpose that drives our efforts, right? Because maybe you don't want to get up every day and do the mundane task in your business, because I think sometimes we tend to like glorify entrepreneurship, and so we think of it as a little bit glamorous, and therefore we really overlook a lot of the repetitive actions that lead to success, whether it's research, whether it's marketing, whether it's networking, or whether it's refining like our product or our service, or finding, income or capital if we're looking for funding. The grudge work, so to speak, is sometimes where people might get a little bit lost. And I think that it becomes very essential to have that bit of an anchor to your purpose and to know that, oh, these are my values and this is how it is connected to my quote unquote company. And so even when I don't want to, craft another marketing campaign, I know that I'm doing it because one, I believe in decolonization and social movements cost money. But two, because I also have two small children, right? And so it occurs to me that I do not have the privilege of being selfish, and I have to think about not only my well-being, right, but I have to think about the survivability of my children, and if they choose to have children, the survivability of my children's children, right? And so having a clear sense of why we're motivated really helps us, I think, to be able to take those consistent actions over time that will in turn have a strong impact. And the last comment I would like to make on that is that I think that the other challenge and reason why people tend to perhaps get exhausted and give up is that they're doing busy work in their business, right? And so people sometimes get so busy doing things in their brand that they're launching or quote unquote trying to grow. But those tasks don't actually bring money in the door. And so if you are, refining your logo consistently, working on the website all the time, but not quite launching it, or constantly refining or changing your offer, you're not able to prioritize those tasks that are going to actually bring the money in that will also motivate you to keep going.
Wow. Wow. Profound. So, Baba, Renee's asked this question. So I want to, I'm going to comment on it. We have some great questions and comments here. So I'd like to, we're going to comment on them. So he's asking, and this is a wonderful question he's asking, and it's something that I meant to touch on. He's saying, well, what would you tell a person that thinks they are not good to have their own business? So I want to comment on that first, and then I'll like your point of view, Dr. Hadiya. So here's the thing. Here's a trick. I mean, it's not really a trick, but it's a reality. So most people in most spaces, especially when they're coming out, or even as they may be have been in business for a long, most people don't ever think they're good enough. To be honest, I mean that's the reality. Most people never think they are far enough along to offer any service, right? And so we have to like shift that way of thinking. And I would challenge people to think, okay, well, what can I help someone with today? Because you don't have to know like every single thing about any area that you're. It doesn't matter what you're. Maybe you're in acupuncture. Maybe you're in wellness. Maybe you're in IFA. Maybe you're in Lukumi. Maybe whatever. Right? It doesn't mean like you have to know every single aspect in order to help someone. You could help someone in very profound ways just based oftentimes sometimes your life experience or what you do know. So I would say focus on what you do know, but continue to build. I mean, continue to work on your craft, continue to develop yourself, but think about, okay, what do I already have? What do I already know that somebody else could benefit from? Because it's just all growth and all learning is a journey anyway, right? So it's about, okay, what can I do today with what I have, what I know, and also with what I love, and also with who I love. I would challenge people to start there. But it's a mistake to think about Beyonce probably doesn't think she's good enough. So even people at the highest levels of success, inside, a lot of them are really struggling. The most successful artists a lot of them still struggle with thinking, maybe I'm not good enough. What if my next album doesn't sell? You'd be surprised. All of these big name celebrities you look up to, they're still struggling with the same question. Maybe they're not really good enough. Maybe they're a fraud. Maybe, but it's just human. It's a very human question. What Baba is saying. And so what are your thoughts, Idea, on this?
Yes, this is a very human question, and I do have three thoughts on it, right? The first being that I love to challenge assumptions, right? And so whenever, when someone says something and perhaps we can call it a limiting belief, right? One of the questions I'll always ask is, well, why is that the case? And then I encourage people to kind of make a list of why, specifically, concretely, right? They believe what they believe. And then to literally go through that list, item by item, and to look for evidence that undermines the belief that they're telling themselves and that paints a picture that's more expansive, so that they can start to say, well, where can I find evidence that I am good enough, right? And so the second thing that I would say is that this is where I think that spiritual work and personal development becomes really useful to business, and also, going to therapy, talking to your diviner, because I find that all of our beliefs and assumptions about ourselves, they have roots, right? Sometimes it's spiritual roots, sometimes it's also rooted in our family dynamics, our experiences growing up. And so being able to get to the root of why we feel the way we feel becomes really important. And then I'll also say that it is wonderful to take imperfect action, right? In grad school, we used to say that a good dissertation is a done dissertation, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, but you do have to do it, and to trust that you will continue to learn and develop your expertise as you go. And so for people who feel like they may not know enough, or that they're not good enough to quote unquote run or have a business, no one is good at anything when you're first starting out. You don't learn to run by running, right? You learn to run first by getting up, learning to walk, perhaps stumbling a couple times, getting back up, persisting until you're able to then develop the capacity to run. And the exact same is in the case in business, right? You get good by doing. You fail up, so to speak, right? That there are so many lessons in the mistakes and the failures. And so I love encouraging people to recognize that in business, rejection is a part of the process. And there's just so much fun and beauty in it. And when you kind of practice the art of not taking one client's no personally, or one potential person's laughter at your quote unquote offer, you then give yourself so much space to say that I don't necessarily need everybody to fully believe in what I do, right? I just need a certain amount of clients to say, okay, cool, I am going to invest in this. And then you keep going. And so you can make and enjoy like the art of recognizing that it doesn't have to be perfect. You learn as you go. And then also you don't have to know everything. Hire experts and delegate whenever possible. And so if we think of so many different entrepreneurs, they don't do everything in their business, right? And so recognizing that you're a human and you're on a journey and you're learning as you go, and that you can surround yourself with people who have the knowledge and the expertise to assist you on your journey, whether they are mentors, coaches, like-minded friends who have achieved more success, or even people that you hire in your business. There are so many paths through not currently feeling like you're quote unquote good enough.
I love that. So here's another comment just from my friend Allison Joseph Patrick from Trinidad. Hello, greetings to you in Trinidad. So she said, when I was talking about, getting yourself out there and saying what service you provide or product, she says, well, but sometimes fear gets in the way. So that's true. So most people in this space are imprisoned by fear, right? And but the thing is, right? So what she's saying is true, but the question, like the pushback is, well, how long is fear going to get in the way of us living the life we want to live? I mean, what is fear doing for us? I mean, so how long do we want to allow fear to rule us? Because that's what we're doing. We're allowing fear to keep us struggling. So that's what's happening. We allow fear to keep us struggling. We allow fear to just keep us where we are day after day. And
Right.
so, there has to become a point in our life where we have to say, okay, Fair, sorry, but you have to get in the back of the bus today. You're not running this show today. I mean, at some point, we have to tell Fair, sorry, but today is not your day to run the show. Today is my day to run the show. And we just have to move forward. I mean, what are your thoughts, Dr. Sewer?
I think the importance of talking back to FAIR, to go back to my earlier point about listing your fears and looking at them very concretely and challenging your assumptions, I think it's important in part because what is the cost, right, of allowing FAIR to rule you? And don't, I always encourage people, don't just think about it hypothetically, right? No, sit down, write down what other costs, right? If you were able to get 5 more clients this month, but you don't get them because you were afraid to speak up, what are you literally losing in terms of dollars? But then what are you also losing in terms of impact? What experiences are you losing out on? What bit of quality time with your family are you unable to afford? What little bit of additional mental security, right, in terms of being able to have the resources to make it through the next couple months without fear, are you missing out on? And then I think once we get really clear on what the cost of our inaction is, moving through fear is also a practice. I would say that when I first began self promotion, and I call it self promotion because initially the businesses that I grew up in and even the ones I co-owned with family members, those were brands that were very much separated from my individual identity, right? But when I started being a conscious business coach and social impact and art advisor, and all of a sudden I had to put my face on the promotion materials, I was deeply afraid, right? And there were so many moments where I hit send or hit post, and then close the computer. There were so many moments where I posted it and then I cried because it was just so much anxiety or so much vulnerability, right? I think sometimes when we see the people doing business well and quote unquote being highly visible, we think that they were always good at it. And the truth of the matter is they really might have cried their way through it a couple times until one day they were like, actually, it's not that bad at all. And it's actually kind of fun, or, I'm getting a little bit better at it. And so I guess what I would say is that I know people who come from like a Christian background, there's this whole notion that God doesn't give us a spirit of fear. But I also like to tell myself that I'm not alone in this world. I have my quote unquote ancestors with me. I have spirit guides with me. And so it's okay to be a little bit afraid, that sitting with the discomfort long enough to move through it is where a lot of the success is. And I think even let's say if we use working out as an example, when you first start working out, you might be scared, you might be uncomfortable, it might be something that's tiring and exhausting. You have the aches and pains the next day of getting accustomed to it. But then when you do it over time, the muscle memory kicks in, right? And the same is the case for business.
Beautiful. So here's another comment we received from Sage Oates, and I love this too. So what he says is, okay, be efficient in your knowledge of service, use good quality products and price to match your work. If clients find your fees too high, they are not for your offering, and be comfortable with your own authentic value. This is so powerful because oftentimes what happens to people, right, is because we tend, most of us come from communities where we struggle all the time. So there's this fear like, oh, if I charge this, then that's too much, or I shouldn't charge like that, or maybe I'm too greedy, or all of that. And so we have this fear around pricing. But as Sage Oates said, that, well, no, you don't have to, they may not be your clients, so one of someone that I've been mentored by indirectly through his courses, his name is, what's his name? His name is Abu. So he teaches people how to market on Facebook and Instagram. And so his prices are like, I think, $2,000 to be in his program. So he's into marketing and promotion. But he always says, well, everybody is not his client. So he's charging $2,000. You take it or you leave it. If you see value, fine. If you don't, that's fine too. So what are your comments about this idea?
Love this, in part because I find that it is an issue that a lot of my clients struggle with, right? And so I agree with the notion, I believe it was Sage who said this, that they are perhaps not simply your client and you have to be firm in your sense of value. And I find that if people are struggling to do that, again, I love running the numbers. I invite people to run the numbers. Are you actually able to provide the product and service at a sustainable rate at your current price point? Meaning, can you pay for your goods? Can you pay for shipping? Can you pay for team members to assist you? Can you pay yourself, right? And if the answer to that is no, and you have to raise your price, that's totally fine. And I think that we have to be able to determine this question again of who exactly are our ideal clients, right? And to be able to be comfortable in knowing that our ideal clients are willing to work with us. They're happy to pay us at the price point that we are charging. And then if we really find, right, that we want to be more accessible than we are, there are other ways to go about figuring that out, right? Whether you look for a strategic partner, you try to crowd fund, or whether you look for grants or just other sources of funding to actually make it sustainable for you. I think ultimately we can't be too afraid, right, to actually charge what we're quote unquote worth. And so I found in my experience that when I allowed early clients early on to kind of negotiate my prices down, I really actually struggled to do the work in a way that I felt like was on par for all the excellence that I knew that I could offer them. And so being comfortable in your value and saying, hi, I want you to have a wonderful product, a wonderful service, an incredible experience, right? And this is the price point that I am able to do that at. And if you really also struggle with that, I always say get you a support team of friends, of coaches, of someone who's going to remind you of your value. And for me, it was both, I think, my business coach, my mother, who of course is also an entrepreneur and also a business coach, as well as I had one friend on St. John who I would just call him and he would give me the pep talk every time. He'd be like, Hadiya, if people cannot afford you, they are not your client. And so, Ashe, it's absolutely true that your clients are willing to pay you at a price point that is sustainable, profitable, and that feels good for you.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. We're almost out of time. So could you tell us again how people can get in touch with you to learn more about the business coaching that you do? What's the best ways, whether email address, phone number, website, how people can get in touch with you?
Yes, absolutely. I would say you can find me at hadiyasewer.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and TikTok under my name, Hadiya Sewer. That the group program that I'm launching opens in June, and that one is a 6-month program that's going to run from June to November. But if you sign up for my newsletter or follow me on Instagram, you'll get all the updates, all the information about what I'm up to, but also how I can really help you to figure out how you can craft your brand and your business in a way that allows you to maximize profits while also creating a really nourishing life.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us. And I really encourage everyone who's listening, again, if you have a service, to consider like her program. So one of the things that holds people back so much is I found just from my own journey is, an unwillingness to commit to the things that could help us. So we don't commit to the things that could help us. And then what ends up happening to so many people is, we end up living in a fantasy land of, dreaming and praying and wishing and hoping, but then the thing that could actually help us, we don't do. We don't commit, or we half commit. We can't half commit. This is 2023. The year is almost over. No more half committing. We have to commit, right? So, thank you all for your time today. Thank you for joining us. If you have any comments, if you've enjoyed this session, let me know. I'll forward your comments to Dr. Sewer. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll talk to you very soon again. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye. And again, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation today.